Books, 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 and more books. I have so many books. It's crazy. I was just pulling stuff out my library today to think about what I wanted to share on the 31 days of sharing because Wednesdays, Wisdom Wednesdays, what I like to call it, I like to recommend books to you, the audience, folks that are out there. There might be books that I have in my library that you haven't read or don't know about it. So we know that leaders are readers. You've heard that probably hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times, but I like to say that learners are earners. So the more you learn, the more you earn because it's not just reading. You can listen to stuff, you can watch stuff. There's so many ways to learn now. And today I recommended a book by John Maxwell earlier. And here's another John Maxwell book. I have a ton of John Maxwell books. I've almost all of the classic John Maxwell stuff. But this one I read 20 years ago. It's hard to believe that it's been 20 years since I first read this book, right? The first time I read it was 20 years ago. It's wild when I think about it. Like I am in my 40s now and it's like it doesn't feel like it was 20 years ago. It feels like I read this book like yesterday. I mean, 20 years has gone by really fast. It's wild. But nonetheless, this book I found to be extremely helpful because when I did read this 20 years ago, failure was something that I had a real problem with, a real issue with. So this book, Failing Forward by John Maxwell, it helped reshape my perspective around failure because at the time I was still dealing with the issue that I had struggled or failed in college, that I didn't perform academically to the level that I thought I would be able to, that I didn't graduate, that I didn't meet the goal that I had set for myself when it came to going to school and going to college and getting a degree, that I got distracted. I was caught up in partying and I was working too much. I had jobs and a lot of jobs. I had 3 jobs while I was going to college at the same time. None of these are excuses. I'm not giving any excuses, but my point is that I failed and I was still dealing with the issue that I had failed. And it was a hard pill to swallow that I had failed at something that was such a significant part of life, that people were like, you have to go to college and you have to do this, and you have to do this. And I was like, the one thing that I was supposed to do, I failed at it. And this book was helpful to reframe my thinking about that part of my life. And it wasn't that long ago after reading this book that I had a transition and I started a business and things changed from there. But what was interesting going over this and thinking about this book, there was a thing that came up in the book that talked about turning points. And it said that in your life, you'll have about 3 to 9 turning points, like 3 to 9 time periods in your life that you could have 3, you could have 9. So it's a range of how many you have. But these turning points, these are critical points in your life where things happen to you that change the direction or the trajectory of your life. And that the ones who are successful, people who are going to make it, are the ones who use these turning points as a lesson in persistence, as a lesson in basically the comeback or failing forward, as in essence. So I highly recommend this book to you, and I want to share a couple quotes that I pulled out of this book. If you've been following me over the 31 days of sharing all the different segments, when I recommend books, you'll know that whenever I have books like this, that there'll be times, let me see if you can see it, that I will highlight. You see my highlighting and underlining stuff. I have a habit of highlighting, underlining stuff, and making notes. That's why I still get physical books as well as audible books. So there's a couple things I want to highlight about this book that I thought were interesting. And one, there was a quote in the book, and it was from a young lady. Her name was Irma Bombeck, and she's a journalist. I believe she was a journalist. I can't tell you what time period. I forget exactly what year she was born or when she passed away or when she was a journalist, but she said something that John Maxwell put in the book that was interesting. She said, what you have to tell yourself is, I am not a failure. I failed at doing something. I'm not a failure. I failed at doing something. And I believe that whoever is listening to this today, either live or on the replay, that is an important distinction to make. failing doesn't make you a failure. It just means that you failed at that one thing that you were doing. So because you failed at playing basketball doesn't mean you couldn't play football. Because you failed at playing the piano doesn't mean you cannot play the violin. It's just that that thing that you did may not be the thing for you right now or at that moment, which is an interesting distinction to make, because sometimes when people fail at something, they think that because they failed at this, that defines who they are as that person. And that is not true. That's a belief that they create for themselves, but it's a belief that you could also change. And your self-talk, what you're saying to yourself, will help decide what beliefs you pick up. Another thing it was big in the book is about action versus inaction. So it was a feeling about, there is a George Bernard Shaw. He had a quote in the book that said, a life spent in making mistakes is not only more honorable but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. Right? That was a good one. A life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. There was a quote by John F. Kennedy that said, there are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risk and cost of comfortable inaction. So doing something is better than doing nothing at all. So even if you do something and mess up, that was better than not doing anything at all. Now, these are just the important distinctions to make, because a lot of people are afraid of failing rather than learning that failure is part of the learning process, right? Part of the learning process. When I look at my little nephew Mason and the process that he's in life, he just turned 1 a few months ago, so he's still learning, right? But he's failing and learning. So you fall down, you get back up. I mean, that's how you learn how to walk. You fell down, you get back up. So you stumble, you get back up. And sometimes we forget that child mindset that we had to just get back up when we become adults, because we fall down and it's like a major issue. And that leads me to another thing I wrote down. Let me look at my notes here. It was so fascinating when I wrote this down. Yes, oh, here it is. It says that we overestimate the event and underestimate the process. That we overestimate the event and underestimate the process. That every fulfilled dream occurred because of dedication to the process. So when we think about our mindsets about the goal or achieving, it's like we think of the event, the thing, higher than the actual process of getting there. So walking versus the process of learning to walk, right? It's the process of falling down and getting back up. That's what creates the ability to be able to walk, to run, for those of us who are actually doing it. And now you don't even have to think about it. You can walk, you can run, your brain just does it automatically. You get up, but when you were younger, it wasn't the case. So the process is really what it's all about, is the dedication to the process. And let me look here to see if there's one more thing, if I am not missing anything. I know you can tell I'm probably excited about this book. This book was really important to me when I read it 20 years ago. It was a major shift for me in my thinking and my thought process back when I was 22 years old, I think 23 years old, whatever I was at that time when I read this. And I think there's one more thing that I talked about, the turning points. Oh, Thomas Edison had a quote in the book that was interesting. He said, "Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up." And I'm going to end on this. He said, many of life's failures were people who quit before they got to but they were so close. He said, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success, when they gave up. And that's where I want to end with the thought is like, well, how close are you in the process? And to continue to hold on, because it's always the darkest right before the dawn. So there's sometimes a breakdown that you experience right before you experience the breakthrough. These are all phrases that you hear people say all the time, but the reality is that you don't know how close you are to making it. And you also don't realize how far you've come. Sometimes we don't realize the process, how far we are from where we started. And do you want to stop now after all the progress you made? So the key is not to give up. The key is to stay in the game and continue to keep failing forward. So that's my recommendation for you this evening is the book John Maxwell's Failing Forward. So until next time, my friends, be valiant, be vigilant, and be